There aren't that many linebackers who actually matter in the NFL. Edgerrin Cooper has a chance to be one of them.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you'll find Locked On Packers, the number one Packers podcast on the internet. And the show for fans who know what happened, they want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Create an account and use code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Last minute tickets. The lowest price guarantee. That's Game Time. Terms apply. Edgerrin Cooper has the physical tools to be an outstanding linebacker, to be a true difference maker in a league that has very few of them. But a lot of players in the NFL have the physical tools. Quay Walker has the physical tools. But where players tend to come up short, there are a couple different reasons why players fail. The big one is injuries. Guys just can't stay healthy. Sports history is littered with players who had a chance to be great, to be good, to have long careers, but they could not stay healthy. You never wish that on anybody. You hope Edgerrin Cooper stays healthy. The second is, and this is in no particular order, is attitude, work ethic, focus, those kinds of things. You can't get along with coaches, or you don't absorb the playbook quickly, or you don't see things quickly, or you don't, you just don't have the right mindset before we get to that last piece. And that's more players than I think a lot of us realize. The third part is players who are unable to develop in key areas. So the guys with physical tools can't develop the IQ side of the game. And it's not because they're stupid. The fact that you call it football IQ makes it seem like they are stupid. They're not. That's not the thing. And so I want to separate that, and I want to make that clear. There are a lot of players who are in other walks of life, or in, just at the chalkboard, able to diagnose and identify and do all those things. But in real time, with everything happening around them, for whatever reason, it just doesn't work. When you have the physical tools, and everyone at the pro level has the physical tools, it's one of those three things. You never get the mental side down. It's the sort of soft skill mental side, the focus, the work ethic, the coachability factor, or it's injuries. And the only thing we've seen so far, rookies, they don't have a long track record of injuries. We don't have any information there. The people at Texas A&M raved about Edgerrin Cooper. The Packers so far are raving about Edgerrin Cooper in terms of his coachability, all those things. It's easy to be focused now, though. Let's see when he makes that first contract. Like, those things tend to change your perspective, or you have adversity and you can't overcome it, or you don't have the drive, you get hurt and you got to rehab, and that sucks. Like, there's a lot of things that can knock you off course, even if you're the kind of athlete who has been on course for your entire career. The reason I'm bringing all of this up is one play in minicamp in June. Okay. So understand, that's why I want to put all of this into perspective, because I could have said a lot of this stuff with Quay Walker too. I think Edgerrin Cooper was a significantly better pre-draft prospect than Quay Walker. I said that in the pre-draft. I said that when he was drafted. I said that when Quay was drafted. This is not revisionist history. Everydayers, especially if you've been with me since 2022, you know where I stood on Quay pre-draft before the Packers took him. But there was a play in minicamp yesterday designed. Matt LaFleur called the play to trick Edgerrin Cooper. And he didn't. And Matt LaFleur was so sure he was going to bait Edgerrin Cooper that when he didn't, he asked the defensive coaches if they had shown Cooper the script. That's how disciplined Cooper was on this particular play. Now, it's one play in June at minicamp. I understand all of that. But it's also a good time to point out that this is the place where if he takes that step, he has the physical ability to be a dominant linebacker. And there are like 3 in the whole league, maybe 4. It's Roquan Smith, it's Fred Warner, and frankly, everyone after that is there's a gap. Maybe I'm missing someone. But there's fewer than half a dozen, and everyone plays 2 stacked linebackers most of the time. So we're talking about 60 plus guys, and maybe 6 truly impacts the game. Cooper, and the reason I want to expand on this is because not every player has the physical tools to do that. And so it is this processing, this identification, this read and react that makes them either good or not good players. So someone like Isaiah McDuffie has to rely on his read and react because he's not the S-tier athlete that Edgerrin Cooper is. You know, Nick Barnett was an undersized linebacker. Desmond Bishop was not the most agile linebacker. He needed a very specific kind of role. Scheme is a big part of this. Now, I think this is a defense that can suit someone like Edgerrin Cooper. I don't think Fred Warner is the comp for him. I think it's actually Dre Greenlaw in a lot of ways. But if you're talking about high-end outcomes. But the athleticism, the downhill closing to the football burst, the size, the length, the pass rush ability, that stuff is not coachable. It's why the Packers prioritize athletes. It's because those are the things that you can't teach. So if you are Anthony Campanile, if you're Jeff Hafley, and you see this guy who's got he's just this big ball of tools, and you can start to get him with the football ID stuff, the read and react, the stay disciplined in these moments stuff, then he has all the other tools to be an elite player, to be a truly field tilting kind of linebacker, because you can blitz him and he can wreck a game. He can be a downhill run stuffing linebacker and can wreck a game getting into the backfield and just absolutely wrecking shop. But if in play action situations, if in coverage, he develops, not something he was asked to do a ton. Just because we didn't see him do it doesn't mean he can't do it, but it's going to take some time. And if he's already in these moments, that's a good sign. Now, is it proof? Of course it's not. But that one play made me go, okay, this is worth talking about because it's the thing that if he does it, he can get to that elite level. And there are a lot of players who it's just like there's no one thing that they can fix and become an elite receiver. Like you're just capped at a certain point. Like here's a good example. Romeo Doubs is a really nice secondary player. I don't mean to pick on anybody, but like he's a really nice player. NFL player, he will have a 10, 12, 14-year career in the NFL if he wants one, if he stays healthy. But there is not one thing I can point to and say if he gets this part of his game down, he can be a top 10 receiver. I can do that with Christian Watson. I might be able to do that with Dontavian Wicks. I might be able to do that with Jaden Reed. But I don't know. Maybe that's a lack of imagination on my point. But when you have the physical ability and you have these other defined traits that we know are there, that we know, that we see, that are so obvious, You go, okay, to be a complete player, it's this. That's what makes him such a tantalizing prospect. And the fact that we're already seeing those glimmers, those flashes, that's a really good sign for his long-term development. I want to talk about Jordan Love and his place in the NFL because we had some Locked On hosts have some thoughts on this. And I have some thoughts on their thoughts. We'll do it next. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Finding tickets, it can be a pain. But at Game Time, they take the stress, they take the confusion out of buying tickets. With killer last minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and the lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Last minute deals. Save up to 60% buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Up to an hour after your event starts, you can buy tickets on Game Time. Plus, with the lowest price guarantee, if you find a ticket in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price, guaranteed. Jordan Love, still trying to fight for some respect. Speaking of, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So it is the offseason. And so it's time for lists. And over on Locked On NFL, Kate and Michelle Maju, Kate has been on our show, and I've followed Michelle for a long time. They did quarterback rankings, and they had Jordan Love 12th. Here's what they said.
Jordan Love executed what was probably one of the most surprising seasons, for me in 2023, considering the complexity of Matt LaFleur's system, the fact that he was a year one starter, and the fact that he was working with one of the youngest and most inexperienced skill position player groups. How could you not have him just a little bit higher heading into year two?
It's hard, right? There's a lot of good quarterbacks in this league right now at the top. So I do think Jordan Love is the type of guy that can definitely rise up my rankings next year, but he just has to show more. I mean, it was a half of a season. The first half of the season was really, really bad for him. And then the second half, it was so much better. And that was his first year starting. So maybe it just took him time to get his feet underneath him. And maybe that's who he's going to be the rest of this time, is his second year when he led the NFL in passing yards and touchdowns from weeks 11 through 18. That could be him. But also, like, looking at the more challenging stuff, right? Like, in the fourth quarter, he really, really struggled last year. He had nearly a 15% higher completion percentage in quarters 1 through 3 than in the fourth quarter. Lowest in the league at 54% completion percentage in the fourth quarter. Threw 7 interceptions in the fourth quarter. That was the second most in the league. But then also, like, seeing where he struggled, it was on those passes over 10 air yards. So he was dominant on the passes under 10 air yards, and that's great. Like, you need to be able to do that. But
those are the throws you should be dominating.
Yeah. Over 10 air yards, that's where he threw 12 of his 13 interceptions last year, including the playoffs. He had a 47 completion percentage and any throw over 10 air yards. Really, really brutal. Also threw 9 of his 13 interceptions with no pressure at all. And those are kind of the sticky stats, right? The under pressure is the non-sticky stats. The ones not pressure. In rhythm through 11 of his 13 interceptions, against non-blitzes through 12 of his 13 interceptions. Like, they were coming on plays that he should be dominant, and he just struggled in those areas. So I just need him to get a little bit better there, and he can move up next year.
Now, I get some of the criticisms and the clean pocket stuff and the interception numbers. Now, I will point out the fourth quarter thing, because Warren Sharp just had a stat yesterday that the best quarterbacks in the fourth quarter without the lead. By EPA per play, Jordan Love was a top 10 quarterback in the second half of his games without the lead. Losing. Brock Purdy, by the way, who Kate and Michelle ranked the 5th best quarterback, I'm not going to dig into that, was one of the worst. In fact, was worse than Justin Fields, was worse than Zach Wilson, was worse than Bryce Young with the lead late in the game. Almost all of the stats that Michelle mentioned, especially the interception numbers, are, with literally one exception, all from the first half of the season. Because all of Jordan Love's interceptions were in the first half of the season. All of them. He threw 1 in the second half until the 49ers game, and then he threw 2, and those were out of character. 1 was just kind of a miss, threw it a little too hard and behind the tight end, and it bounced right to a linebacker. Those are just kind of unlucky plays. Second one was a bad decision. Giants one was sort of a mix of a bad decision and a bad throw. But that was one play in the second half of the season. All of his worst plays were in the first half of the year when the offense was a complete nightmare. A complete nightmare. And in the second half of the season, he was also one of the best deep ball throwers in the league. Now, the completion percentage stuff, okay, but he was also, when you chuck the ball down the field, you don't have to complete quite as high a number of passes to be efficient. And he was. We know all the advanced stats, the EPA per plays, all that stuff. So if you're looking for reasons to be down on Jordan Love, like they're out there. There are stats to point to, but they're almost exclusively from the first half of the season. And I think also, whatever the word was specifically, that he was bad or that he was awful in the first half of the season, that's just not true. First 3 games of the season, Jordan Love was excellent. There was a 5-game window when Aaron Jones was hurt, when your offensive line was a mess, when Christian Watson was hurt, when you're running an RPO and no one runs the pass on a run pass option, no one's running a route. These are the kinds of mistakes. They had to scrap a whole concept. They basically didn't call strike, drive, drift, whatever you want to call it, in the second half of the season. Because it just wasn't working. The details weren't right. I mean, he threw 3 interceptions on it in the first 5 weeks, Jordan Love did. And there were 2 interceptions against the Steelers on forces to Christian Watson when you're in the second half of these games trying to catch up. Part of that was also the defense was getting absolutely dog-walked in the run game. And yet it was that Steelers game that everyone points to in Green Bay to say that was when the whole thing changed for us. I don't want to get bogged down in he should be ahead of Kyler Murray. By the way, he should be ahead of Kyler Murray. I'm kind of fine being behind Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford was awesome last year. I don't understand why he's behind CJ Stroud, who they have 8th. I think generally the list makes some sense. No way he should be behind Brock Purdy. I'm not saying going into the season, Jordan Love has to be your number 2 quarterback. You don't have to be Mike Tannenbaum. He would not be mine. 12th is slanderous. It's just not real. It's just not true. But he does have to prove it to a lot of people. And so I think it's important for us, we're in it here every day. Locked On Packers listeners, a lot of you are football sickos. And so you are in it. And sometimes when you're in it, it's hard to see the forest for the trees. And you're in your bubble. We are in our bubble, I will say. And you can miss what some of the public perceptions are. Like Packer fans are extremely confident that Jordan Love is going to have a really good season, that he's really good. But most teams in the NFL right now are confident that their quarterbacks are going to have really good seasons. The Bears fans for years were confident that Mitch Trubisky and Justin Fields were going to have really good seasons. So one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up was not just because we're talking about a locked on set of hosts, but because there is still something to prove out there for Jordan Love. And I think that's just useful context here for the season. And look, if there's something out there that's going to help Jordan Love get motivated, it's stuff like this. He's going to say, it's going to roll off his back, but all these guys are competitive as hell. They're psycho competitors. At least a lot of them, especially the high-level quarterbacks. So he's going to have to prove it. I get it. Speaking of high-level quarterbacks, psycho competitors, we're going to talk about a different one to end the show. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV Channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Yes, we're going to talk about Aaron Rodgers. And if you don't want to hear our conversation about Aaron Rodgers, you can turn the show off, and we'll see you tomorrow. Good to be with you. Thanks for coming by. But I had a follower on the X machine, the Xbox, the Twitters, make what I thought was a very salient point. Because what we found out was Aaron Rodgers skipping minicamp. Mandatory minicamp. Yeah, he was at OTAs. Oh, he was such a good teammate last year. Most inspirational teammate. Kumbaya. But what this follower said, Mike, I believe his name was. I'm not going to attempt the last name because I'll butcher it. But what he said was, there are these people that are annoyed that we bring this up. He says, I don't know why it's so wild to people that current happenings can reframe the context of what's happened in the past. As a Packers fan, how do you not look back at those final seasons and see them a little different now? Mike Suzak. I want to give you your propers, so I'm going to attempt the name. Sorry if I butchered it. I love that point. Now, if you're a Rodgers apologist, if you're a Rodgers stan, if you're a Rodgers caper, you don't want to reframe your point of reference. You don't want to take in this new information and go, actually, maybe I should think about these things differently. You just don't want to do that. And so I understand this desire for confirmation bias and to avoid things that don't confirm your priors. So you want to think Aaron Rodgers, faultless GOAT, Packers screwed him, and he's going to be a world beater in New York. Okay. I mean, that's your prerogative to believe that for sure. But what happened last year? Packers fans said, this is going to go great early and it's going to get difficult, and that's not going to go well. I mean, the reporting as of this minute, and this could change, is that Aaron Rodgers is on vacation. Like, is it a big deal that he's going to miss mandatory minicamp? No, it's not in a vacuum. But think of how many times over the years, because Aaron Rodgers was Aaron Rodgers, that these little, let's call them microaggressions, went hand-waved because he's Aaron Rodgers. And because in a vacuum, not a big deal. It's not actually a big deal. He was at OTAs. Not really a big deal that he's missing camp. It's not gonna make or break your season. But guess what? Matt LaFleur raved about having Jordan Love at OTAs. You'd rather him be there. Aaron Rodgers, when he was unhappy in Green Bay, misses the mandatory stuff, the summer of discontent, all offseason. I'd rather be in Hawaii than at mandatory minicamp. And part of this is just part of the MO. I quoted him and people got mad. I quoted Aaron Rodgers. You remember the quote? It's not a half the time thing. It's not a sometimes thing. It's not a most of the time thing. It's an every time thing. If you want to be a winning organization and put yourself in position to win championships and be competitive, everything that you do matters. And that bullshit that has nothing to do with winning needs to get out of the building. That is a quote from Aaron Rodgers. He's always been good at being able to say the thing that he's supposed to say when he's supposed to say it. And the double talk master is always able to go back and say, well, but I didn't, boo. How can you not see this is happening again? And so the little things that were ignored and then reared their ugly head on the way out, calling for people's jobs, making it about you, saying, well, I don't need to be at camp. It's not beneficial to me to play with these rookies in Green Bay. But then, well, I got new teammates. I have to go play with them in New York. I want to be all in, but all in on my terms. If you're a Packer fan, especially someone who rides for Rodgers, how do you not see the pattern of behavior and go, this is suboptimal? And look, get mad at me for this if you want. But they just had a day for Tom Brady. A day. Because he's won so much in Boston, a city that over the last 15 years has won more than like any city in the world. 20 plus years, I guess now, if you include the early Patriots stuff. You don't even have to. And the city is crushing it. What would Tom Brady do? He'd be at minicamp. He'd be at minicamp. No question. Because he is a psychopath about winning. And you are just lying to yourself if you think that Aaron Rodgers is only about winning. He's just not. He is only about Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is only about Aaron Rodgers. And by the end, a lot of Packer fans saw that. I wish some more local media saw that, but they continued to ride the coattails, hang on every word, breathlessly report it as if it is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And now, things didn't go so great. And Robert Saleh has got to eat you-know-what at the podium and act like, oh, this is all fine, even though he called it an unexcused absence. And you know he'd rather Aaron Rodgers be there than freaking Tyrod Taylor. Aaron Rodgers is about Aaron Rodgers. And I don't know how you look at what has happened over the last couple years and not had it affect the way that you think about everything that preceded it. I don't know how you don't let it affect the way that it ended with Mike McCarthy. How does this information now not color all of that in a different way? For me, it has to. And it has nothing to do with anything other than those things. For whatever Rodgers wants to claim it's about. Things that the only people are talking about are him and people who agree with him. The only people who care about that stuff. I'm not even gonna reference it because I don't care. That was 1,000,000 years ago. Move on. Okay. That's enough. But I wanted to bring that up because I just thought Mike's point was so salient. It was so important. And I still get people who are like, why you got to talk about him? Oh, well, maybe we should talk about the most important, the best Packer of the last 20 years. Maybe we should talk about him for a year or two. And look, Rodgers and Love are always going to be linked in the same way that Rodgers and Favre were linked and are still linked in a lot of ways. So this is not going to, like, we're not going to spend time during the season talking about this, but it's June and Rodgers is making news. And I do think it's important that we say this accumulation of facts, accumulation of information. What did Schefter say? It's become pretty unignorable at this point, inimitable at this point. I went from a made up word to a much better word. All right, back tomorrow. We won't talk about Aaron Rodgers unless we have to, but I hope we don't. I hope we don't. I really don't. I really don't. Back tomorrow with a lot more Locked On Packers. Back next week with a lot more Locked On Packers. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts. All the social medias, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Locked On Packers, YouTube, Locked On Packers, so you can stay Locked On Packers.